Welcome to Actual Spinster. My name is Anna Marie. There is a GoFundMe link in the description box, which is to help support Allah and her family in Gaza in terms of their living costs, and also potentially to leave when that's a possibility. If you can check that out and donate, that would be great. Today's video is kind of like a catch-up wrap-up, I guess. It's just going to be like a summer reading wrap-up. So these are the books that I read in June, July and August, and yeah. And the first one that we're starting with is Romancing Mr. Bridgerton by Julia Quinn. So what can I say about this book? I think it's bad. I'm not a romance reader. If you've followed my channel, you will be able to tell that, because I don't I'm not really inclined towards romance as a genre, and a large part of that is I don't care about heterosexuality. Obviously I know that there's non-heterosexual romances, but I also think that quite a lot of those romances, because romance itself is a very generic, tropey genre on purpose. Obviously that's what a lot of people like it for, but because of that, and because those tropes often stem out of heterosexuality, I find that even when there's queer stuff, again, from what I've seen people talk about and the criticisms that they levy against particular books or about particular books that are sapphic, for example, I think that some of the queer romances reproduce the issues I have with heterosexuality. But anyway, that's just a preamble, because I feel very uncomfortable and out of my depth talking about this book, I guess. But the reason why I read it, let's start there. So this is Romancing Mr. Bridgerton, right? It's in the Bridgerton series. I'm a pull-in shipper and I didn't know this about myself until most recently. So I read it because I watched Bridgerton and I just desperately wanted Penelope to be happy. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, I'm sorry. So I read it. I did not enjoy the book, and the only reason why I think that the book was vaguely redeemable was because of my engagement with Bridgerton, the TV show, which had already fleshed out and animated the characters, so that I could then just take the fully formed characters from the show and plop them into the book, which for me, as an experience, as a reader, I don't mind, unless maybe there's something that's oh, I wish I had read the book before I'd seen the show. But to be honest, that doesn't really happen. I'm quite careful and intentional about what I watch first as opposed to read first. But so because of that, I think that it wasn't terrible, and I didn't completely DNF it, but I think without that I 100% would have. And I think there's a lot of really horrible ideas about anger in the book, and Colin, he's the love interest. It's a romance between Penelope and Colin, and it's friends to lovers. That's the whatever. And Penelope's a bit, she's kind of chubby, and she's in her 27th or 28th year, crazy, so ancient. Anyway, so they've been friends, blah blah blah. Yeah, but the point is, in the process of their romance, one of the ways that indicates that Colin does have romantic feelings for Penelope is that he gets unbelievably angry with her. And I honestly don't know why you'd want to ever romanticize those kinds of behaviors. They aren't represented as cute or anything, but they are brushed off in a way that I feel is pretty morally gross. And there's even a bit where he's holding onto her arm, and there's some kind of thought about whether it's gonna bruise and stuff, and that was awful, scary. So anyway, this further underlined that obviously heterosexual romance is not for me, and yeah, I'm kind of obsessed with Bridgerton, that's really it. So yeah, and obviously I also projected my own sense of this is really, but I also projected my own sense of unlovability onto Penelope, so that's also why I desperately wanted her to be happy in the book and in the show. So yeah, anyway, it's gonna be a long wrap up, I think, but also I'm so sorry. Some of these books I definitely have spoken about in bits and bobs on my channel already, so hopefully I can get through some of them a bit quicker as well. Yeah, the next book I read was The Barrow Will Send What It May by Margaret Killjoy, which is the second in her Danielle Kane book series. So it's a little novella, so it follows on from the last one, and it's set in this world where there are kind of demons and occult forces, and also obviously anarchism and friendship. And this one is centered on this great squatted library in a different town. I guess there's a zombie element to it, where town residents who were dead show up alive. They have to kind of uncover the mystery of what's going on. Definitely enjoyed this more than the other one, and I really enjoyed the first one. Yeah, I guess it does help that like you've had some world building and friendship building in the first book, and then this one you can kind of sit back and enjoy it more, and it doesn't necessarily feel as rushed. I think that first one is packing quite a lot in, and it's great, like I wouldn't, you know, but just like it's not that many pages, but lots happens, whereas with this I guess we don't need so much background, but you know there's still some world building happening. Yeah, but really enjoyed it. Would definitely recommend Margaret Killjoy. Very excited about her new book coming out. Yeah. The next book I read was Care Manifesto by The Politics of Interdependence by the Care Collective. I was reading this for quite a long time. It's not a very long book. I have like folded over lots of pages to check out, I guess, so maybe I should go back through. But the thing is, I didn't find this particularly useful. I mean, I found it interesting, I guess, but like I wasn't especially moved by it. I personally also, I didn't think that it was going to be so statist. Like it's very state socialist kind of approach. It wouldn't say that, but you know, that, and that's fine, but it's just not really what I was looking for. And then also I think this is one of those books where it kind of is conglomerating a bunch of things together, where actually maybe reading directly about them is more interesting. So it like references lots of interesting things, like there's this idea of promiscuous care, which was developed by this gay person by academic and ACT UP activist Douglas Crimp. How to have promiscuity in an epidemic. So that was like interesting, but again, like they only briefly touch on it in a chapter about kinship, care and kinship, which yeah, it's like you know, so I could kind of take or leave this. It wasn't particularly great, and I also feel like a lot of the examples are basically America, England, and maybe Canada at some point, but like the rest of the world doesn't get much of a look in terms of like giving an example, or like they talk about like municipality, and they talk about like economies of care, they talk about welfare states, they talk about, like I said, different frameworks of kinship. So they do talk about, like, again in very small detail, like indigenous conceptions of care and kin, especially in terms of resistance to the Dakota pipeline. But like again, that's all pretty like succinct and surface level. And then like I said, I still think that the lack of more global, especially global south potential like examples or alternatives was like, yeah, very much lacking, which I think is just a shame. Like I feel like, I'm sure this happens all the time in books like this, but like it gives some really interesting examples of like, this is how this particular community was dealing with, I don't know, how the bank was like fucking them all over. But you know, that's obviously happening worldwide. It's not just like in the global north. We're being so innovative and developing so many different caring strategies. You know, disappointing. Okay, so now we get on to like a lot of my kids book reading. So I think I did mention this recently, but basically me and my friend Mari, who's been on the channel, my best friend, my wife, she and I have been reading through a series of Unfortunate Events by Lemony Snicket. I've never read the whole series. As a kid I read the first book and then I was like, it's a bit sad, so I didn't do that. That was a really intense phase. I have seen the Netflix show, and Mari read them as a kid, and you know, we're both interested in like these depictions of like, you know, child abuse and like neglect, and also how it's like a critique of the systemic imbalance of power between adults and children, but it's like a kid's book for kids. And also there's, you know, maybe some more fun elements too, even if they are pretty miserable. So we've been, yeah, reading that. That was a long preamble just to say that I'm reading the series. But yeah, I'm reading the series with her. Basically how we're doing it is we start the book at the same time and then we read it, and then after we've both finished it we talk about it. But it's not like a strict schedule. And we're currently reading the 6th one, but yeah, I guess I'll get to that. Or yeah, anyway. But yeah, so the next 2 books I read were The Bad Beginning and The Reptile Room. And I think so far, and also when I read it, I think that The Reptile Room is probably my favourite one of the whole series. It's got great fun snake stuff, but also I just really loved it, and I thought the way it wrote about grief was actually really moving, and I liked that a lot. So The Bad Beginning is just like the very beginning of the story, and it starts off where these the Baudelaire orphans, like their parents die in a fire, their whole house mansion is destroyed, they're very wealthy, and then they get sent to their nearest relative, who's a man called Count Olaf, and he's like an actor and an awful man, and he really wants their fortune, and then the rest of the series is basically him pursuing them through these various things, taking on different disguises and constantly fooling the adults but never the children really, except for maybe in like a key few places, but not really, and the children constantly never being actually listened to or having their fears like heard or being safe at all. And the Baudelaire fortune is like basically never actually gonna be taken away, or like there's no real threat to it at all, but like the children themselves, their very physicality and their childhood itself is constantly threatened and harmed by the whole process, like not just Count Olaf's like aggression and abuse, but also the adults like complete disregard for these children and their incapacity to listen or care appropriately. So it can be pretty rough, but then it's also got this like humorous edge, and there's a lot of repetition. There's also a constant, you know, as you can tell from the title, like it's quite a sort of like Baroque Gothic kind of fakey sort of thing going on there, and I think that does help with the like threat level and the horribleness of a lot of what's actually happening, because you can repeat. There's lots of times when Lamini Snicket speaks to you and says like, if you want to read a book about, you know, a nice child having a sunflower in their hair, then you know, close this book and find another one, you know. And it's constantly recounted about how like miserable and how bad the events were and how unlucky the children are, to the extent that sometimes they give you like kind of a heads up almost that a bad thing is happening. So I do feel like that really helps, like for children reading this to feel maybe a bit more secure about what's going to happen. I am kind of hoping to make a video with Mari about this series, like when we've read all of it. So I feel like I'll probably just say a lot of what I just said then in it, but like obviously also I'll have more hindsight because I'll have read the whole series. And then also I thought we could watch the like rewatch the TV show and then like compare the two and stuff, because I know there are some criticisms, but to be honest, like I don't think they're actually fair. I don't think you can. Anyway, whatever. So yeah, I read those two. I also love Uncle Monty. I think he's gay. I mean, I know he does fail them too, like all the other adults, but I think at least in the reptile room they do have this like little glimpse of like having a nice time with Uncle Monty when they get like before Stefano / Olaf arrives, like they get to go to the cinema with him, learn all about the snakes. Baby Sunny gets to have a nice time, just like, you know, they have a little haven there for a very, very brief amount of time. The next book I read was a little break from a series of unfortunate events, but not a break from children's books. This is The Ministry of Unladylike Activity by Robin Stevens. This is her second series, I guess, or like it's the follow-on series kind of thing, like it takes place after her A Murder Most Unladylike series, but the main characters are siblings of, well, the sibling of Hazel, who was one of the main characters, and the narrator of A Murder Most Unladylike series. I love Hazel. I liked her sister a bit less, but you know, I also spent a lot more time with Hazel. Hazel's sister, oh no, I've forgotten her name, is May Wong, and May is a bit younger, I think, as well than they were in the original series. And this is set in the 1940s, so this one is set basically at this like family estate where May and this other boy get sort of they manage to smuggle themselves to it via pretending to be evacuees basically, and of course like somebody dies, so then there's a murder mystery. Yeah, I think I will keep going with the series, honestly. Like I didn't think I would, but then like I listened to this on audio, and during the time when I was doing a lot of thinking about my PhD and doing a lot of like very intense serious reading, I then was also trying to figure out how to relax, and I found this on my, I think it was on my like audiobook, you know, like my local library has it as an audiobook, that's the way to say it. And so I just started listening to it, even though like before I had like tried to read this and I didn't really get into it, but I was just like in the framework then, and like it was nice to listen to it as well. So anyway, so there's that one. And yeah, like I said, I am going to keep going with the series. I think there's something about the Blitz is the next book. Then I did return to a series of unfortunate events, and I read The Wide Window. I think of the ones I read so far, I disliked The Wide Window. Well, certainly in that time, I disliked it the most out of the three that I had read. Aunt Josephine is just so frustrating, and I think also maybe because I did enjoy The Reptile Room so much, there was like a little dip for me as well. And it does get frustrating. Obviously that's the point. The books are very frustrating because it is frustrating to not be listened to constantly be undermined, to like, yeah, simply have your genuine knowledge, your understanding of the world be completely like stripped away from you by adults who think that they know best for you but they don't, and have demonstrated it over and over again with deep callousness and not even cruelty, you know, like not even active cruelty. They've just been careless. So yeah, but I enjoyed this the least, like I said, out of them so far. I see it on my story graph, I've given it 3.5, but I don't think it should be 3.5. I think it probably should be a 3, but who knows. The next book I read was I finally finished Meanwood by Nicola Griffith, which is a sequel to Hild. I enjoyed this so much, and I also watched this really fantastic talk with her, which I'll leave in a link. I think it's really worth checking out, it's lovely. Where she talked about how she has like a lot more Hild books in her, and she's like wanting to write maybe like at least 2 if not 3 more in the series, and I was like so happy to hear that. I'm like so happy, like I love this. If you have like recommendations that are like Hild, like it could be fiction or non-fiction, but also like I don't want there to be a lot of sexual violence is like a major prerequisite, then let me know, because I feel like it's hard to find books that are like this. Like there is sexual violence in this and also in the first one, but like very brief, and I can't remember what happens in the first one. I just know that I wrote a content warning for it in my review, but I can't remember what it was that happened, which I'm happy to like not remember. But with this one, it's like it doesn't happen directly to Hild, it's to someone else, so that makes it slightly less upsetting in the sense of reading a book. Does that make sense? Hope that makes sense. So yeah, I guess I don't really want to tell you like what happens in the plot at all, because like the first one obviously is, you know, it would spoil some of the first one, but it's really fantastic to see Hild and her kith grow and change. I just think that there's like a richness of the world, a richness of place that is really fantastic. I know that Nicola Griffith doesn't consider this to be like fantasy, but I don't think it's like completely separate from that, because like Hild is a fantastical magnetic figure, and so, you know, but like it isn't magic, but the world is a mysterious, beautiful and like creative place with all sorts of forces and unseen wills and God in it. So like fantasy. I hope we don't have to wait 10 years for the next one in the series, but at the same time, like if there's gonna be like 4 books in the whole series, maybe 5, I don't mind waiting 10 years, I guess. And yeah, I think that like you can tell about this richness and how it's very much embedded in Nicola Griffith's writing practice through that talk I mentioned. So like I said, I will link that, and I'd really recommend you check it out if you're interested. Some of the plot from the first one I think would like kind of be spoiled, but it's not major, and like, but then yeah, maybe it's a bit weird to watch if you haven't read any of them. So the next thing I read was Brideshead Revisited by Evelyn Waugh. Yeah, I started listening to this podcast that was about, it was mentioned by Sean from Pastory Time by Lily Analick, about Bennington College and like Bret Easton Ellis, and she's right there, what's her name, Donna Tartt and Jonathan Lethem, that were all out and stuff, and I got interested in that podcast for some reason, and I started listening to it. I mean, I'm not interested at all in Bret Easton Ellis, like at all, but I was interested in Donna Tartt, I guess, and also like I do like campus stuff, so I did just start to listen to it. I really don't remember what it was that like incited me to start, but I did start listening to it, and then people were talking not only about The Secret History, obviously, because Donna Tartt is like a main protagonist in that podcast series, but also Brideshead Revisited a bit was like important on the campus, and to The Secret History, but I guess we'll come to that. So, and I hadn't read Brideshead, and I just was like, well, I guess it's kind of time. Also, it's a book from the 1940s, so I was like, well, that's useful for me and my challenge to read books published before 2000. So I read it, and my conclusion is it's a solid book. I think it has quite a cruel internal world, which I think that Donna Tartt recreates for her Secret History, but I also think it comes from her own understanding of the world too, and I also don't think it is a coincidence that both of these authors are Catholic, and they have like a preoccupation with this idea of suffering being like a good thing, because I mean, it's fine if you think that is true, I guess, but I don't think that's true. I certainly think that in the world where people try to have just and caring relationships with each other and themselves, you can't lionize suffering in such a way, because it creates a very fucked up paradigm of self-victimization and also victimhood in general. Brideshead, I felt like I was a bit missold it, to be honest. Like, the way people had previously talked about it, not just on the podcast or anything, but just in general, was as this like big campus novel. So I presumed that most of it would take place in a campus, i.e. at a university, and that's not really true. Like, the first part of it, the first maybe third, maybe less, takes place at Oxford University, but the rest is proliferated elsewhere. And obviously this is a very iconic book, and I also then vaguely got a bit obsessed with watching the Brideshead Revisited 1980s version, which is actually what people were watching at Bellington College in the 1980s. That was really why people got into Brideshead Revisited. So I was having a bit of a weird time. This is obviously a very gay book, sort of both explicitly and implicitly, which again I think is interesting in comparison with The Secret History. I did read these two books close together, so it was hard not to think about Brideshead when I was reading The Secret History, you know. But anyway, so Brideshead, it's fine. I did think it was very, very funny. I also felt like it was funny, but at what cost? And like, the cost feels a bit like the cruelty, the cynicism towards humanity and humanness. And again, this idea that like, to be sufferer, to be whatever, is so beautiful, so important actually, and so valuable, and like so, like good in the world. I do think Charles Ryder, who's the narrator of the book, he's a very interesting character. Like, he is obviously gay, and like, he loves Aloysius. Nope, that's the teddy bear's name. What's the main character boy name? The teddy bear. He does love Aloysius. Who doesn't love Aloysius? Sebastian. That's it, Sebastian. And then Sebastian has a twin sister called Julia. So yeah, anyway, but it was interesting to read, and like, it's a recollection novel, so like, it starts off actually in the 1940s, during the Second World War, where Charles Ryder is like looking back on his time with Sebastian and his family, the Marchmains. Yeah, I think one thing they really got wrong in the 1980s show, which I haven't fully finished because there's a lot of episodes, and also it gets so sad in the end. Like, I don't like it, and there is a lot of like alcoholism stuff going on in it, which I found really hard to read, which again I felt I was like kind of unprepared for in the way that people talk about this novel. In the TV show of it, I think that they really badly cast Sebastian's mum, because she is kind of charismatic. She's represented as a vampire. She's got this like sickness, but she's also clearly quite an alluring character, and I felt like the person that they cast for her was really wrong, and like didn't get that vibe at all. Like, it wasn't right. But anyway, okay, I'm gonna make myself stop talking about this now. Okay, well, also before we get to The Secret History, gosh, I'm definitely gonna split this wrap up. Before we get to The Secret History, I guess I have to talk about The Miserable Mill, because that's what I read in between. So that's the fourth book in the series of Unfortunate Events series. This one I gave less than The Wide Window, but I actually think it should be the other way around, or maybe they're equal. With The Miserable Mill, I definitely felt, and perhaps it's because I didn't enjoy The Wide Window a lot, in the sense of the frustration, not because I think it's like a bad book. I don't think any of these are like bad. I think they're solid children's books basically, but like, yeah, I felt that frustration so intensely, and then I just found it like very distressing and disheartening to read The Miserable Mill, but then nearer to the end part it like picked up a bit more, and I got more kind of reinvested and invigorated to read it and finish it. I also will say, I think it is in The Miserable Mill, Count Olaf takes on lots of different disguises, and some of those are certainly more questionable than others, because there's like a disguise that he picks in a next book where he wears like a turban and stuff, and uses like, says he can't take it off because of his religion and stuff. And I think if these were written more recently, that would definitely be more sensitively and differently handled. And there's also a couple things as well that would definitely change. There is one, it's quite funny because Count Olaf has like a troupe of evil villains who help him, but they're all kind of bumbling too. One of them is more straightforwardly kind of like an aesthetic villain, in the sense that he has two hooks for hands and he's supposed to be really scary. And obviously I think, you know, we should not just think that people who have like limb difference or use like prosthetic limbs or prosthetic tools or whatever are necessarily like scary or villainous or something. That's obviously bad. And then there's one character who's like really fat, and also you can't tell if they're a man or a woman, and like that's so scary. And it's so funny to read now in the context of this kind of like very much more gender free world, but also to just feel like, what is scary about that? I don't get it. Like I think even reading it as a child, there's no way I could have been convinced to be scared of someone because they're fat and you don't know if they're a man or a woman. I'd be like, that's interesting. Okay. What's their name? Yeah, like I said, I think that would change. But I also think that that is what some of the work in the TV show kind of does, some of the like rewriting of that, or the sort of like flattening of the idea that those things would be scary. Like the man who does have hooks for hands, like he can understand Sunny in the show and stuff, and he seems actually quite sweet. And the person who is like so fat, they didn't choose a particularly fat person, I will say, which I think they should have, but like they're also kind of chill. They honestly have like stoner energy. They're quite fun in the show too, you know what I mean? So yeah, anyway, The Miserable Mill, yeah, it was okay. I read it, done. Oh yes, but the reason why I brought that up actually is because in The Miserable Mill, Count Olaf dresses like a woman, and like Count Olaf is obviously not a woman, and he's obviously doing it to harm these children and stuff, and like it's not, but obviously it wasn't comfortable to read. So the next one we get onto is The Secret History by Donna Tartt, finally. Okay, so The Secret History, obviously this is like a big book in terms of like everybody talks about it, everybody like has something to say about it, like a major bestseller, and it's obviously from the 90s, set in the 80s. I think this is a good written book. I think that a lot of its success comes from a level of snobbery with genre fiction that I dislike. There's a lot of descriptions of it, like for example on the back, right, it says a thinking person's thriller, which I just find is actually kind of sickening. Like, you know, I understand, I guess, what they're meaning by that, in the sense that it is like an intellectual book, it's quite cerebral, it's interested in academia knowledge and like ancient Greek behaviors, but at the same time, like, I think that's very rude and weird about thrillers. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm kind of offended on behalf of people who read thrillers. Other thrillers are just so like unthinking and like, you know, simplistic and like not for intellectual clever people. Does that make sense? I felt also kind of like a lot of the time like Donna Tartt is showing, she's obviously like the self-insert main character, Richard Papin. So if you don't know what this is about, it's about a bunch of students who kill another student and like what happened. And you do find that out right at the beginning, so that's not like a spoiler or anything. I've had a snack and I read my review that I wrote of The Secret History to like maybe kind of try and help myself, and and then I found that this is the review I wrote for it. Ready? I read this so I could understand the Stonewall Prep season of Riverdale. Pretty hilarious stuff, if you ask me. Yeah, so I give this 3 stars, and so like I said, so this is about, it is a campus novel, much more a campus novel than Brideshead Revisited was for me, but I would say massively sort of overhyped. I'm kind of glad about this because the person has a name of someone that I don't ever want to think about, but like they're supposedly, and certainly like on the back it kind of sells this as like a sort of key reason, which is like that there's like a charismatic classics professor, but I didn't find him to be at all charismatic. I was just told that he was like enthralling and exciting, but I never felt that through the book like at all. I just felt like it was very clear he was an elitist and just like a creep. This is the problem with not filming wrap-ups like in the month where you read something, because I feel like I did have a lot to say and I feel like I talked to people about this book, but now I can't like, you know, remember it so well. But yeah, I mean, like Richard Papin, the main character, like I said, is obviously a Donna Tartt insert. Okay, here's what I'll say. So I think this is like trying to be a critique of elitism and academia like that, and the sort of hierarchy and class, because like Richard Papin is like a different class than most of the people in that particular like group coterie of students who study ancient Greek under this charismatic professor who, and he like you know, very specifically picks people and allows them in or doesn't. And it's obviously based on their class, on their social situation. And so Richard Payman does quite a lot of kind of pretending, lying, whatever. And it's not totally true that like all of the people are at the same class level, but there's certainly a massive amount of wealth. But I think the critique falls short. That is a bit how I feel like with Brideshead too, is that the critique doesn't go far enough. It still glorializes, that's not the right word, kind of glorifies this idea of upper class intellectualism, and privileging a particular kind of access. Obviously classics themselves, as in not classic books, as in classics as in the study of like ancient civilizations, is a heavily class subject because it was the pastime of rich white men for a very long time. And obviously also because there's, especially I think like in the UK and also probably the US as well, there's like a very particular preoccupation with Greece and Rome in terms of like imperialism as well, like especially Rome, I guess. And then also this like whitewashing of the past, just in the sense that this is not, we aren't actually talking about like a white past or a specifically Western like hegemonic space. Like it had all of these like contradictions and interesting contrasts and like whatever in it, but like white supremacists and white men, and obviously the Venn diagram, you know, like to imagine it just as that. I sort of lost what I was saying, I guess, but like, so like choosing classics as the subject matter in the sense of the study that's going on in here is not an accident. Although actually listening to that podcast I mentioned earlier, like I learned that like it's also much more based on like what was happening at Bennington College when Donna Tartt was there, in a way that did make me feel a bit less impressed or like intrigued by it, because I feel like she did kind of, which again is fine, like that's not but she did kind of just take like people and she put them in her book and then she called them something else, and then she took another person and she put them in her book, and then she took herself and put her in the book, and then she was like, ooh, I'm gonna have a little fantasy about what could happen and it's a very cynical, sad fantasy. And like Richard Payman himself is a very like opaque narrator, but not in a way that I found interesting just in a way where I was like, okay, you're trying to be clever, and then also that you're just a liar, which again like is fine obviously, but I feel like I find unreliableness maybe a bit more interesting when there seems to be like an earnest effort not to lie or obfuscate. But I mean, whatever. I just think that like Lucy Snow in Villette is the like #1 unreliable narrator, and nobody else is ever gonna measure up to her because she's so fucking good. Yeah, I'm sorry. But yeah, so I just think that like Donna Tartt really did like want to be part of this world, even if she also saw the drawbacks, and even if she herself also was not from a wealthy background and struggled to be part of it and be included for multiple reasons. I guess like if you love The Secret History, you should definitely listen to that podcast. I will say I don't really like how Lily Anna like talks about, I didn't listen to all of his episodes where he's the main focus, because like I said, I don't care about Bret Easton Ellis, and also I don't want to listen to stuff about teenagers doing loads of drugs, and also people doing loads of drugs in general. Like, no thank you. Especially cocaine, worst drug. I guess if it was like mushrooms, I actually probably would have been more interested. But I will leave a link to that podcast if you're interested in checking it out. It's also based off of like a written piece that Lily Anna like wrote as well, so you could just read that as well, which I think might be better actually. I don't like the way she talks about the abuse that Bret Easton Ellis, like his abusive father and stuff. I think she doesn't understand abuse and like makes it exceptional, when the whole point about kind of abuse and violence is that it is not exceptional, even when it is like appalling, but that is itself like doesn't stop it from being abuse. Like it doesn't transcend abuse, and I think it's very naive to think that. But the one thing I did like about this, I will say, is that the key students involved is they are learning ancient Greek. Like that's one of the things that they're learning, and so they get to a point in their kind of fluency where they can speak to each other in ancient Greek, and obviously nobody understands them, and I love that idea. But also I've been trying to figure out like other languages that could work, because the problem is like ancient Greek is actually kind of perfect, right? Because it's quite different from Greek, like modern Greek. So even if you had modern Greek speakers, they wouldn't be able to understand you. And like nobody is just randomly learning ancient, you know, I mean obviously some people are, but in the sense that like if you were just out and about Like, there's absolutely no way, you know? There would be such a tiny, tiny chance that somebody would understand you. And also, these students work really hard at it as well. So, like, even if you did understand some ancient Greek, you probably wouldn't understand it to the level they do, because they are, like, obsessive and very intense about it. So, yeah, I've been thinking about that because, like, obviously, I really want to learn Yiddish, and I love Yiddish. But actually, if you were speaking Yiddish, it would be comprehensible to some degree by people who spoke German, and it also depends on like the dialect that you're speaking, but also there's like some Polish words in there, maybe some Russian. So like I think it's too, you know, I mean obviously script wise like people don't really know Hebrew, but then at the same time, thanks to the State of Israel who we hate, and like modern Hebrew, which I do think is treif and shouldn't exist, but because that does exist, like obviously people do, like more people do speak and understand Hebrew. Obviously if you started speaking like biblical Hebrew, it would maybe be slightly different, but there would still be probably too much comprehension. I guess you could try Aramaic. That would be cool. Anyway, let me know if you can come up with some other options. I'm definitely interested. And now that I'm learning biblical Hebrew for my conversion, but also so that I can then learn Yiddish, now that I'm doing that, I'm like, wow, I could learn 800 other languages. So yeah, let me know. I feel like I didn't really offer very much with that discussion, but I hope you kind of know what I mean. Like, I didn't go into it trying to be a hater or anything like that. I didn't sort of enjoy it. And I guess like it's kind of a bit like Piranesi, where I am just like, why don't you care about women more? I don't know. I just end up feeling like some of it is kind of a bit trite, is maybe the word, or sort of like, I don't know, yeah, trying very hard to be very clever and intellectual, but really like it is about your desires and wants and yeah, your particular fantasies, and like it's not less or more serious than other people's, but like it doesn't make it intellectual or make you an intellectual necessarily. Like I you know, that maybe sounds a bit more cruel than I mean it to. But then I just think like it is a cruel book and it kind of inspires cruelty towards it and outside of it too, which I don't like and I don't agree with, like kind of obviously, but also just like as an intellectual practice, I think that you're missing out on the world if you engage in scholarship with this particular lens of cruelty and like violence, and that like life itself is so very, very little to you, which is just inaccurate to like the many people who you even purport to like care about, you know, like these ancient Greek people who you are studying. Like I said, I read it to understand the Stonewall Prep season of Riverdale, which I would like to rewatch actually now that I've read. There's like a character in that show, like in that season, called like Donna Sweet, I think. I split this wrap up into 2 parts, so this is the end of part 1. Bye!